Good evening. I was asked to talk about examples of good management and an example of bad management in regards to corporate communication. The first example is of Iraq, and that's actually the good example. As you all may be familiar, this is during the Iraq War. This is one of the prisoners that were tortured during the Iraq War, and it came out that the CIA was torturing thousands and thousands of people and doing all these terrible things like the CIA does. And so what happened was that this man right here is being tortured. There were several other people that were tortured in terrible, terrible ways. Okay, so what happens is, this is the Supreme Court, and this is a guy, a protester. What happened was that President Bush, his response was that it's just a few bad apples. That what happened in Iraq was just a few bad apples, and a couple of low-level soldiers actually were the ones that got persecuted. And of course, the CIA wasn't persecuted, not one person within the organization was persecuted. In fact, I've been studying the CIA for pretty much 20 years, and I have yet to find one example of a CIA operative being prosecuted for any wrongdoing. And this is the same example right here. Okay, so that is my first example of effective corporate communications, and in this case, government communications on a macro scale. I'm now going to share another example of good macro government communications, which will lead directly into a bad example. Okay. All right. The effective managing of a government scandal is the genocide of the American Indians. I grew up Mormon. Mormonism is a cult. I was very active in the church. I went on a mission, and they actually believed that not only was it the destiny of Americans to go across America and kill the Indians, but Jesus Christ actually came to America, and they were the chosen ones. So they not only believed in what's called manifest destiny. This is a picture of manifest destiny. That this angel is guiding you can see here the angel is guiding the different pioneers across the plains. And as they go across the plains, they're killing all the Indians. So again, my religion that I grew up, the cult that I grew up in, actually believed this. They actually believed that there was actually angels that came down to America, and there was Jesus Christ. So, here's a picture of one of the wonderful causes of this. This is all American Indians in one of the massacres. What happened was, and here's a picture of exactly the expansion of the United States, right here. And most people don't know this, but actually Hitler used this example, this template of the American genocide for his genocide of the Jews. The only difference between Hitler and America is that America was successful. Okay. The final death, the final end, pretty much the last big battle for the American Indian was in 1890 at, I believe, Wounded Knee. And this is actually pictures of them dumping the bodies into the pit. And I studied American Indians since my childhood. And for 42 years, I could not find an example of a single person or organization that actually criticized what was happening here. That is effective government communication on a macro scale. I could not find one example of anybody criticizing this. I finally found when I was 42 years old, I found what was called it's a church. It's called the Quakers. And if you all remember from my lecture earlier in our ethics class, The Quakers were the organization that actually stopped slavery. So not only did they stop slavery, they also they made the suffrage movement. Every person here, every woman here that actually votes, it's because of the Quakers. So they not only abolished slavery, they also abolished, they caused the suffrage movement. And they're anti-war. They've been anti-war since for approximately 500 years. So this was the only organization in the entire world that was opposed to this was the Quakers. That is incredible government communication. Okay, so this is going to lead into the bad example. All right, so what happened is again, 1890. This is the very end of the Indian Genocide. All right, so again to the picture. Basically, ocean to ocean. It's done. The genocide is finished. So there's a couple of skirmishes, but there is still, but it's pretty much done. The Eastern Europeans, or the Europeans rather, have won, and then the Indians have been massacred and through genocide. So that was 1890. This is the example of bad corporate communication. Okay. All right. So again, it ended in 1890. So what happened is not just on February 1898. This is just 8 years after the genocide is finished. The genocide is completely finished, and there's 8 years of there's not peace because they're still killing Indians, but it's pretty much a calm. Again, America has been completely, the suppression of the Indians is done, it's finished. What happens is that there's an explosion in Havana, and there's a lot of argument on what happened. But this was right about the time that the Spanish Empire was collapsing. And people in Washington saw it as an opportunity. So they blamed this, the USS Maine, they blamed this on the Spanish. And there's a lot of arguments that it could have just been something, it could have been something very pedestrian. It could have been basically the coal in the actual boat blew up. But regardless, America blamed the Spanish. And they said, this is the Spanish that did this. And there was this huge war cry, remember the Maine. And so what happened is this. This is what happened. Is America went from being a regional superpower to an imperial power. And I just found this out today. There was actually a Boxer Revolution where they tried to suppress China at the same time. I've never studied that very much. But this is where the Maine got destroyed. And as a result of that, America took Cuba, took Puerto Rico. Around that time, I think they took Hawaii, or a little bit later. But that was a different thing. Just basically, they took Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, and I believe Guam from Spanish, and they took it over. Now, this is the example of poor communication on a macro scale. The Philippines. Okay. All right. The first concentration camp, the very first concentration camp. The Jews have basically, and I can say this because I'm in Russia, I can say bad things about Jews. The Jews basically have a monopoly right now on the Holocaust and genocide. But in reality, the first concentration camp, there's been several concentration camps, and the very first one was around this time, and this is South Africa. And there is what's called the Boer War. It's where basically the English were destroying, we were just slaughtering the Boers. And that was when the very first concentration camp started. And guess what the Americans did? The Americans said, oh, those British are so terrible, they're horrible, how could they create concentration camps? And guess what happened? About the same time, the second concentration camp in all of history was created. And that second concentration camp was in the Philippines. And that they had a concentration camp in the Philippines. They just rounded everybody up and they all died in the concentration camp. And here, is a picture. It's an editorial picture, cartoon from that year. And what it's actually showing me an event. And this is what happened, this came out of the media, is the soldiers lined up people in villages, and the head of the organization, or the head soldier says, kill everybody over 10 years old. And that got out, that they were killing everybody in the Philippines. Very, very bad communication. And so it went all over America. Soldiers were coming back and talking about the horrors. Okay, one second. And so what happened is there was the United States Senate Committee on the Philippines, and that was created. And I found this so fascinating is that there were two committees. There were two types of people, and they were called imperialists and anti-imperialists. You were either for the war and you were an imperialist, or you were against the war and you were an anti-imperialist. And there was these huge committee meetings, and all of these things came out about how they were killing people, and these soldiers were testifying about the brutal things they saw, and again, the trenches with all the dead people, and the concentration camp conditions, and it was just a complete circus. And just really quick, this article here, United States Senate Committee on the Philippines, if you see here, I've been studying this for a while. This is clear back in 15 years ago, and that's me. So I've written like about 90% of this article. So